Now, when your theory, the theory that you've put so much energy to, right? Remind you, this is not a contention that people just picked up, like whatever. Socialism sounds cool. People were passionate about socialism. They thought that socialism was really the future of mankind. How would you feel if something that you were extremely proud of, something that you were extremely proud of, absolutely annihilated, both on the left and the right side of the political spectrum? That'd be insane, right? So, but instead of failure, instead of accepting failure, instead of bowing their heads, leftist socialists decided to make various changes uh to socialism, from psychology to epistemology, even to the way we debate the merits of socialism and capitalism. Right? They developed skeptical epistemologies. Right? Remember postmodernism, denying reality and reason. They denying reality and reason in order to make room for socialism. At this point, in the 1950s and 60s, socialists were at the same point as, or on this, at the same point as religious thinkers in the 1700s. The religious thinkers in the 1700s faced the Enlightenment. They were unable to justify their religion on the basis of reason and merit. It turns out that religion has a lot of contradictions within the Bible, and it was unable to up, you know, keep itself upright against reason, against science. And so, counter Enlightenment thinkers essentially created skeptical epistemologies, starting from Kant, in order to subvert reason, in order to create room for reality. Kant literally said, I don't remember the exact quote, so I'm gonna paraphrase. I deny reason in order to make room for religion. He writes this in his critique. I believe it was his first critique. He literally writes that. I'm paraphrasing, but he writes that he denies reason in order to make room for faith, in order to make room for religion. And there were many other German philosophers who tried to destroy reason and reality in order to make room for religion. The first course of action for the socialists who were in crisis at this point of time, the first course of action was disassociation. And so this is where you get and this argument is still made today, right? When you list out socialist countries that failed, Cuba, the Soviet Union, communist China, Cambodia, they say, well, that's not real socialism, right? Right? That's not real socialism, dude. Then what is real socialism? The only reason why they're making that argument is because they cannot move on in arguing for socialism if they're still associated with those atrocities. They can't at all. So after this association, they decide to change the ethical standard. The first ethical standard, the first thing that they change within the ethical standard is changing the debate from need to equality. Today, you never hear the debate about need, right? But that was essentially the debate in the 20th century. Which economic system can provide the working class, the poor, basic necessities? It happened to be that socialism did really bad at it, and capitalism absolutely destroyed, absolutely hit the nail on the head. I mean, not only were the poor given their basic necessities, but the poor were getting richer. The poor now in urban areas within capitalist societies like the United States, I mean, they have easy access to air conditioning, right? Despite them being poor, they can have maybe a subscription of a Netflix a subscription or two. Well, I guess the second subscription would probably go to maybe Spotify or Apple Music, right? They can have a few subscriptions, have their AC, have a nice house to live in. Well, not a nice house, but at least have some sort of shelter. If you're talking about the poor class, the working class in America, they're well off. So the socialists realize that, and they realize, well, we can't debate capitalism on the grounds of need, so we'll debate them on the grounds of equality. It turns out that capitalism's greatest weakness is equality, because there is a attitude of you get what you deserve in capitalism. Everybody have different outputs. Their production is different per person, per individual. And so nobody, or no groups will get equal outcomes. Postmodernists and critical theorists will make the argument that as long as there are differences in outcomes, there is racism or sexism. Right? That argument is essentially pushing for socialism. Right? It is running on that ethical standard change from need to equality. They say that any disparity in outcome is indicative of, Kendi would say, systemic racism or sexism, and that the systems need to be torn down. But you see, our systems of capitalism naturally causes inequality, so it is impossible for capitalism to remain under Kendi's definition, under Kendi's proposition. But that's the point. The point is not to keep capitalism. Capitalism is evil. They do not believe in capitalism. They do not believe in the West. They believe in socialism, and so that proposition is, when you look inside, that proposition is essentially an argument for socialism. So first, socialists would make the proposition that, or they would change the ethical standard, changing the debate from need to equality. The second course of action for them in changing the ethical standard was changing wealth from being a good phenomenon to a bad phenomenon. This is a consistent message among the left, branding the rich as evil. Well, it was necessary to make wealth a bad thing, since capitalism was really good at producing wealth, not only for the capitalists but for the middle class and the working class. So wealth must become a bad thing now, because if wealth becomes a bad thing, then capitalism becomes a bad thing. If wealth is a bad thing, then the corollary is capitalism is a bad thing as well. The leftists, the socialists, started to make arguments that capitalism was exploitative, not in the fact that the poor would get poorer, but in the fact that the poor was getting richer. So they were confused, and they got essentially, in a way, hypnotized into thinking that capitalism is good for them. Marcuse, a contributor to the Frankfurt School, used psychology, and he used this idea of the poor being hypnotized into thinking that they were making gains under capitalism, when in reality they're being exploited. Marcuse uses those two arguments. And so Marcuse uses Freud. Freud is a psychologist an important one, especially an important one because he is known for psychoanalysis. Freud believed that civilization is an unstable surface phenomenon based on a repression of instinctual energies, and that civilization suppress those instincts, but those instincts cannot be absolutely destroyed. And so there are times where when there is more order, civilization is winning the battle against those instincts, and when there's more chaos, those instincts are winning the battle against civilization. And the battle is always happening. It never ends, essentially. Sometimes the id will reveal itself in a form of hysterias, obsessions, and phobias. This was perfect to the Frankfurt School. I mean, now they can argue that capitalism continues to be exploitative, but in hypnosis form, right? As people surround themselves with more machines and more wealth, they become they become unaware that the comfortable world that they live in is essentially exploitative. It's just a mask for the underlying realm of chaos. And Marcuse argued that that mask needs to be unraveled. It needs to be destroyed, and the chaos must prevail. Marcuse believed in that there were few people that understood this, that did not fall for the hypnosis that capitalism was putting the working class under. And those people, essentially, one of them being Angela Davis, made gains trying to essentially destroy civilization. And in that sense, you get leftist terrorism in the 1960s and 70s. Another response to the failure of socialism was changing socialism's epistemology. In the 1950s, with the fallout of logical positivism, reason really began to fall on a philosophical level. On a cultural level, the fallout is kind of delayed. I mean, now you're starting to see the fallout now in 2020, but in the 1950s, it was kind of delayed. I mean, like on a physical level, the United States were still focused on reason. They were still prideful in reason, but on a philosophical level, reason had been essentially killed off with the fallout of the logical positivism. Again, that's another can of worms to open up. That goes into like the philosophical roots of postmodernism, which again will be a different will be addressed on a different time. So to summarize, essentially, socialism failed, and a response to that failure was disassociation, changing the ethical standard, need to equality, and from wealth is good to wealth is bad. And changing socialism's epistemology. Marcuse's idea of hypnosis, I call it hypnosis, exploitation, fits within the wealth is good, wealth being good is now wealth is bad. Changing socialism epistemology was another one, right? Because reason failed and leftist terrorism was another one. So essentially, to summarize, socialism's response to failure was disassociation, changing the ethical standard, need to equality, right? That's A. B is changing the idea of wealth is good to wealth is bad, which can be found in Marcuse's idea of hypnosis exploitation, and can also be seen in, for example, the how we perceive environmental environmental for lack of a better term security. The traditional notion for saving the environment was there would be huge trade-offs in the beginning of of industrialization and capitalism, right? Because, right, I mean, obviously, that's you can see that with the industrial revolution, how carbon emissions has gone up, right? There would be huge trade-offs in the beginning, but later on, as we continue to improve on a technological level, the people will become wealthier because of capitalism, and the natural result of that would be people using cleaner materials, people living in cleaner environments. That was the traditional notion. I mean, the traditional consensus among environmentalists. However, under this ethical standard change from wealth is good to wealth is bad, is that environmentalism took a more Marxist twist. Now, people were arguing that the environment was essentially a battle between humans and non-human entities, that humans were oppressing the non-human entities, and it's funny, but it's almost a sense of anti-humanism in a way. Yeah, if you're willing to make that contention, they shifted from from this idea that as time moves on, everybody will become wealthier. When you become wealthier, your communities will become cleaner and there will be less carbon emissions, to humans versus the non-human entities. There's a constant conflict between those two groups, and it follows the tradition of Marxism, essentially. That goes under the idea of wealth is good, becoming wealth being good to wealth being bad. So again, finally, just to recap, the socialist response to the failure was disassociation, changing the ethical standard, changing socialism's epistemology, right? Reason died, skeptical epistemology prevailed, leftist terrorism. I believe those are the main five responses to socialism failing in the 20th century. A lot of those responses failed. For example, leftist terrorist groups were essentially destroyed. They were stopped. You don't hear of the Black Panthers today in 2020. So the response to socialism failed, except for a few, like changing the ethical standard, right? We still have a debate about equality now, not need, right? Wealth being bad is still a dominant narrative within American political culture. So there are a few elements of socialism's socialist response. There are a few elements that are still in play today. But disregarding those five, there was one that was the most damning of all of them. And that is postmodernism.